I never planned to fall in love through a $30 baby monitor we'd bought used off Kijiji, but that's exactly how it happened, and I've stopped being embarrassed about it. My name is Caleb Mercer. I'm 31. I run a two-man renovation crew out of a cargo van that's older than some of my clients' kids, and I live in the bottom half of a duplex in Hintonburg here in Ottawa. I do finish carpentry mostly, trim, built-ins, the careful stuff people notice without knowing why a room feels right. It doesn't make me rich. It pays the rent, keeps a bit going into the TFSA, my dad badgered me into opening, and lets me work with my hands instead of a spreadsheet, which is the only deal I've ever been able to live with. And there's one person I text the second anything happens to me. Good or bad, big or small. A truck cuts me off on the Queensway, I text her. I land a kitchen job worth more than I made all of last winter, I text her. Her name is Nora Beaumont. She's 30, she's an interior designer, and she's been my best friend since the second year of college. Back when we both went to Algonquin and ended up in the same drafting elective because neither of us could draw a straight line to save our lives. We met over a busted T-square. I'd snapped mine in half out of frustration, and she leaned across the table, handed me hers, and said, "You're holding it like you're trying to fight it." That was it. That was the whole beginning. By the end of that term, we were splitting a large double-double every morning at the Tim Hortons on Woodruff and trading horror stories about our instructors. By the end of the next years, she'd talked me through the worst breakup of my life. Sitting on the floor of my apartment with a bag of ketchup chips and a 2-4 she wasn't even drinking, just keeping me company until I stopped being pathetic about a girl who, honestly, had been right to leave. People always assumed we were together. Always. Her mother used to call me Nora's Caleb before she even knew my last name. My own dad asked me once, very carefully like he was diffusing something, whether Nora and I were an item, and when I said no, he just nodded slow and said, "Huh, in that way fathers have that means more than a whole lecture." Our families even knew each other. That part still makes me laugh because of how much it should have tipped me off. Her parents had been up to my dad's place on the Quebec side for a barbecue. My dad had driven out to her family's hardware store in Perth twice to buy lumber he could have gotten cheaper in town, just because he liked her father, Roland. We were so tangled into each other's lives that the only two people who couldn't see what was obvious to everyone were the two of us. I told myself we were just close. That's what I said when anybody asked. We're just best friends. And Nora, when she heard me say it, would smile this small smile and look at something across the room, and I never once asked her what that look meant. I was very good at not asking. The night everything changed didn't start out as anything. I'd come off a date, another one off the apps I keep swearing I'll delete and never do. Her name was Brooke. She worked in marketing for one of those federal contractors downtown, and within 20 minutes of sitting down at a place in the Glebe, she'd asked me what my annual revenue was, whether I owned the van or leased it, and if I'd looked into incorporating for the tax benefits. I'm not exaggerating. I felt like I was being interviewed for a small business loan. I paid for my own half, walked her to her car like a gentleman, and drove home with the radio off. I called Nora from the parking lot before I even pulled out. She picked up on the second ring, the way she always does, and her face filled my phone screen. She was on her couch in that giant gray hoodie she's had since school, eating cereal out of the box, hair shoved up in a knot. "Let me guess," she said. "She wanted your credit score before the appetizers came. She wanted to know if I'd looked into incorporating." Nora laughed so hard she had to put the cereal box down. "Caleb, sweetheart, you're not going on dates, you're going on Dragon's Den." I leaned my head back against the seat and let myself laugh too, because she was right. And because she was the only person who could make a bad night feel like a story instead of a verdict. We stayed on the phone the whole drive home and another hour after that. She told me about a client who wanted a moody but bright living room, which she said was like asking for a hot ice cube. I told her about the Century home in Hintonburg I'd just taken on, a stone and brick place a young couple had bought and run out of money halfway through gutting. We made fun of our friend Devin, who'd started wearing a toque indoors in July. Around 11:45, she yawned and stretched and said she had an early site visit. "Get some sleep, Mercer," she said. "Thanks for listening." Again. Always. And then she did the thing she does, tilts her head a little, opens her mouth like there's one more sentence coming. But she didn't say it. She just smiled. "Night, Caleb." I should tell you about the house, because the house is where it happened. The young couple who'd bought the place, Sam and Priya, who'd then run out of road on the renovation, had hired me to finish the main floor before the baby came. Priya, it turned out, was an old roommate of Nora's from way back, which is how Nora got pulled into it. She came on to handle the design side, the paint and the tile and the cabinet fronts, for the kind of friends rate that means you're not really getting paid, you're just getting lunch. For 3 weeks straight, Nora and I were in that house together, every day, from when the light came up gray over the river to when it went down purple behind the rooftops. The house had a problem, which is that the basement, where I was redoing the laundry and a little workshop, had walls of old fieldstone almost 2 feet thick, and not a single bar of cell service made it down there. Nora and I kept losing each other in the house, her up on the main floor measuring for blinds, me down in the cold stone dark, both of us shouting up and down a staircase like it was 1955. So Nora, being Nora, solved it. She showed up one morning with a baby monitor she'd bought used for $30, the old kind with 2 units, a base and a handset, a little camera and a speaker, the kind people barely use anymore. "There," she said, clipping the base to a shelf at the top of the basement stairs. "Now you can hear me when I need you to hold the other end of something, and I don't have to come down to the dungeon and ruin my shoes." It worked perfectly, too perfectly as it turned out. It was a Thursday, late afternoon, light already going. I was downstairs gluing up a butcher block counter for the little workshop bench, clamps everywhere, my hands full of glue, the radio off because I'd been on the phone with a supplier. The monitor on the shelf above me crackled with the ordinary sounds of Nora moving around up there. Her footsteps, the click of her tape measure, a hum of whatever song was stuck in her head. Then her phone rang up there, and I heard her answer it, and I heard her say, "Hey, Sadie," and I figured it was her sister and went back to my clamps. I wasn't trying to listen. I want that on the record. I wasn't trying to hear anything. But the monitor was right there, 2 feet from my head, and her voice came through it clear as if she were standing beside me. "No, I'm still at the Hintonburg house," she said. "Caleb's downstairs." Pause. Her sister saying something I couldn't hear. "Don't start," Nora said, and there was a tiredness in it I'd never heard from her before. "Sadie, I'm not having this conversation again." Another pause, longer. And then Nora said, in a voice that had gone quiet and flat, like she was reading something off a wall she'd read 1,000 times, "Because I love him, okay? Is that what you want me to say out loud? I've loved him for years. Years, Sadie. And he calls me every single time some woman who asks about his tax situation lets him down, and I sit there and I make him laugh and I tell him she wasn't good enough, and then I hang up and I feel like garbage, and the next week he does it again." I stopped breathing. I genuinely stopped. The glue was setting on my hands and I didn't move. "He doesn't see me like that," she went on. "He never has. And if I tell him, I lose him. That's the trade. So I keep my mouth shut and I get to keep my best friend. And most days that's enough." Her voice cracked. "Just slightly. It has to be enough. I've been fine for 6 years. I can keep being fine." I don't know what I was thinking. I wasn't thinking. I just heard myself say her name, out loud, into the basement, loud enough that the monitor's little light flickered as it carried it up the stairs. "Nora?" Everything went silent above me. Then I heard the phone clatter onto the counter, and her footsteps coming fast across the floor, and the base unit on the shelf went dead as she yanked it out of the wall. The light died. The crackle stopped. I stood there with glue drying on my hands in the cold stone basement of somebody else's half-finished house, and the only sound was my own heart going like a nail gun. I went up the stairs. I had to. I couldn't very well stay down there forever, and I'm not the kind of man who runs, even when running would be easier. Nora was standing in the middle of the empty main floor, in the gray hoodie, arms wrapped around herself, her back to me. The light through the bare windows was that thin blue you get in an Ottawa February when the day gives up early. She'd been crying. I could tell before she even turned around. By the way her shoulders were set, like she was holding something heavy in her chest with nothing but her own arms. "You heard that," she said. Not a question. "Yeah." "How much?" "Enough." I wiped my hands on my jeans, which is a stupid thing to remember, but I remember it. All of it, probably. She turned around then, and her face was a wreck, red eyes, jaw tight, and she looked furious, but I'd known her long enough to know the fury was just fear wearing a costume. "You weren't supposed to hear that," she said. 6 years, Caleb. 6 years I kept that off the table, and a $30 baby monitor I bought so you wouldn't have to climb the stairs. Her voice broke clean in half and she pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. "Nora." "Don't." She put a hand up. Please don't do the thing. Don't say you're sorry I feel that way. Don't be gentle and kind and let me down easy. I swear to God, if I value our friendship too much me right now, I will walk out of this house and you can finish the trim alone. I'm not going to do that, I said. Then what are you going to do? She was almost shouting now, and her eyes were swimming. Because there's no version of this where it goes back to normal. You know that, right? You can't unhear it. We can't just... Oob. I'm in love with you too. It came out flat and plain, like I dropped a board on the floor. No music, no build. Just the truth landing in the empty room. She went completely still. I've been comparing every single one of them to you, I said. Brooke last night. The one before her. All of them. I tell myself I'm picky. I tell myself I just haven't met the right person. And the whole time I'm sitting across from some perfectly nice woman thinking, she's not Nora. She doesn't get the joke before I finish it. She'd never bring me ketchup chips and sit on my floor and let me be a mess. And then I call you on the drive home, and for an hour everything's right. And then I hang up and I tell myself that's just what best friends do. Stop, she whispered, but she didn't mean it. I call you after every bad date, I said, because you're the only person who's ever made me feel like I'm not broken. And I keep telling you about every woman I meet because some part of me is trying to prove to myself that I can want someone other than you. And it's never worked. Not once. Not in 6 years. I took a breath that hurt. I called it friendship because I was a coward. Because losing you was the only thing I could think of that scared me more than telling you the truth. So I didn't, and I let you carry the whole thing by yourself, and I'm sorry. That's the only thing I'll apologize for. Not how I feel, just how long I made you wait. She was crying openly now, not bothering to hide it, and she shook her head. You don't get to say all of that just because you got cornered into it. You don't get to take 6 years and turn it into some grand thing, just because a monitor was on. I'm not turning anything into anything, I said. I'm just finally saying the part I've been swallowing every time you tilt your head and look at me like you're about to say something and then don't. That got her. I saw it land. Her mouth opened a little. You noticed that, she said. I notice everything about you. That's been the whole problem. We stood there in that cold, half-built room, 10 feet apart, with sawdust on the floor and the river going dark outside, and I have never in my life been more afraid and more sure at the same time. I crossed the room, slowly, giving her every chance to step back. She didn't step back. What if we do this, she said, barely a whisper. And it ruins everything. What if I lose my best friend trying to get something more? Then I'd rather lose you trying, I said, than keep you by lying to both of us for another 6 years. I reached up and pushed a piece of hair out of her face, and my hand stayed against her cheek, and she leaned into it the smallest amount, like she'd been waiting a long time to be allowed to. Don't kiss me, she said, if tomorrow you're going to call this a mistake. It's not a mistake, I said. It's the thing that was always going to happen. I just took the long way. And then I kissed her in somebody else's living room, surrounded by drop cloths and a half-finished butcher block counter. And her hands came up and held onto the front of my shirt like she needed to make sure I was real. And I held her like I'd finally been given permission to want the one thing I'd spent 6 years pretending I didn't. When we pulled apart, her forehead came down against mine and we just stood there breathing. I've wanted to do that, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. Since the night you fixed my grandmother's chair and didn't tell me, you just did it, and I came home and it wasn't broken anymore, and you never said a word. I've wanted to do that, I said, since you handed me your T-square and told me I was holding it like I was trying to fight it. We're idiots, she said. World class, I agreed. From the doorway, Priya, who'd apparently come back to check on her own house and been standing there for God knows how long with her hand over her mouth, said, I have been waiting for this for 2 years, and I am so glad I came back for my measuring tape. And then, she very tactfully went outside and sat in her car so we could finish having the most important moment of our lives without an audience. After that, nothing went back. We didn't pretend the kiss hadn't happened. We didn't wake up the next morning and decide to be sensible. Something had shifted, and we both felt it, and neither of us wanted to push it back into place. It happened the way real things happen, which is slowly and without announcement. Nora still had her own apartment in Westboro, and a roommate, and a whole life. I still had the duplex in Hintonburg, with the eavesdrew that needed cleaning and the radiator that knocked all winter. But she started coming over after work, just for supper, And then her good coffee mug ended up in my cupboard. And then there was a toothbrush, and then a pair of her boots by my door that stayed there even when she went home. I watched it happen and I didn't say anything. I just let it. It was like watching the light change in a room you've stripped down to the studs. Slow, and then all at once you realize the whole place feels different. One Saturday in March, I opened my closet for a flannel and stopped dead. Half of it wasn't mine anymore. Her good wool coat was hanging next to my work jackets, a row of her sweaters, her dress boots lined up under my steel toes. I just stood there grinning like an idiot at a closet. She came around the corner with a coffee and caught me. "What's so funny?" "I'm trying to figure out," I said, "exactly when you moved in without telling me." She looked at the closet, and for a second she looked caught, almost guilty, like she'd been sprung doing something she shouldn't. Then she shrugged, going for casual. "Maybe I was just slowly taking over. It's a strategy." I went to the kitchen drawer, the junk one, and dug out the spare key I'd had cut 3 weeks earlier and kept not giving her because I was scared of what it meant. I walked back and put it in her hand. "You don't have to take over," I said. "You can just have a key." She looked at it sitting in her palm like it might be hot. "Are you sure? This isn't just because it's convenient? Because I'm here all the time anyway." "It's because I want you to walk through that door whenever you want," I said. "Not like a guest. Like it's yours. Because it is." She closed her fingers around it and didn't say anything for a long time, and when she finally looked up, her eyes were wet again, and she said, "Okay," very quietly, like she was agreeing to something much bigger than a key. Living together was not a movie. I'll be honest about that part, because the people who only show you the soft focus version are doing you a disservice. Nora is messy in a way I never knew, because for 6 years I'd only seen the version of her that came to my place already put together. She leaves half-finished mugs of tea on every flat surface. She works at the kitchen table with fabric swatches and paint chips spread out like a crime board and gets genuinely wounded if I move one. I, for my part, skip meals when I'm deep in a job, and I'll be in the garage at 11 at night sanding something that didn't need sanding because my head won't shut off. We fought about small things. She hated that I'd forget to eat. I hated that she'd say, "I'm fine," through clenched teeth when she was the furthest thing from fine. One night in April we had a real one, because I'd missed a dinner she'd booked weeks ahead at a place down on Wellington, lost track of time at a job site, and walked in 2 hours late to find her sitting in the dark at the kitchen table, coat still on. "I'm scared," she said, when we were past the worst of the yelling, "that this only works because we're new. That once you see all of me, the mess, the way I take on everyone's problems, the way I can't ever just say what I need, you'll figure out I'm not the person you spent 6 years imagining." I sat down across from her and took her hands. "Nora, I didn't fall for some imaginary version of you. I fell for the one who's a disaster with tea mugs and takes on everybody's problems because she can't stand to watch people struggle. I knew exactly who you were before any of this. You're not the person I want to come home to because you're perfect. You're the person I want to come home to because, after everything, you're still the one I want to come home." She didn't answer with words. She just got up and came around the table and put her arms around me so hard I could feel her heart going against my back, and that was the end of the fight. After that, the apartment stopped being a place I lived alone. It became ours. The sound of her keyboard at the table while I planed a board in the garage. Her terrible singing in the shower. Mornings where I'd wake up to her hollering from the kitchen, "Caleb Mercer, did you eat anything? Or are you running on coffee and stubbornness again?" For the first time in my life, I understood that home isn't 4 walls, and a mortgage you can barely cover. It's the person who makes you want to come back to the 4 walls. And then one Tuesday in June, it all nearly came apart. I woke up and Nora was standing at the window with her phone pressed to her ear and her back rigid in a way I'd learned to read. I caught pieces. "How bad? What did the cardiologist say?" "No, Mom, of course I'll come. The store, I know. I know." When she hung up, she sat down on the edge of the bed and told me. Her father, Roland, the man who'd sold my own dad overpriced lumber just for the company, had had a heart attack. A mild one, the doctors said, but a warning shot. He couldn't keep running the hardware store and the lumber yard in Perth the way he had for 30 years. Her sister Sadie was out in Calgary with her own family and no intention of moving back. There was no one else. Her mother had called not to ask Nora to visit, but to ask her to come home. For good, to take it over. I sat there and tried to keep my face still while my whole chest went cold. "I knew this day might come," Nora said, looking at her hands. "I just didn't think it'd come now. Right now. Right when this is so new. Right when her coat was in my closet. Right when she had a key. Right when we'd finally stopped lying. Do you want to go? I asked. It cost me everything to make it sound neutral. She didn't answer right away. I love my dad, she said finally. That store is his whole life. He built it from one little shop, but I also don't want to give up everything I've built here. My clients, my career, you. She looked at me, and I saw the same fear from the Hintonburg house, the cornered look. And I don't know how to want both. She went out to Perth for 3 days to be with her father. They were the quietest 3 days my apartment had ever known. But it was a different quiet than the old kind, because her coat was still in the closet, and her tea mugs was still on the counter, and her boots were still by the door. Everything in the place promised she hadn't vanished. It just didn't promise she'd come back the same. Just might. On the second night she called me, and this time, for the record, she did not forget to turn off the camera. She was sitting in her old bedroom at her parents' place in Perth, shelves behind her full of family photos and high school ribbons, and she looked wrung out. Dad wants me to come home, she said. I didn't know what to say. If I told her to stay in Ottawa, I was being selfish. If I told her to go, I was handing her away with my own 2 hands. So I asked the only thing that wasn't about me. What do you want, Nora? She was quiet a long time. I want to help my dad, she said, and I don't want to give up my whole life to live out somebody else's, even somebody I love, especially right when I finally have a life I actually picked. That sentence stuck to my ribs for days. She told me later what happened at the family meeting. Her mother, Diane, wanted her to move back right away, take over the counter, learn the books. Her father didn't push, he just got quiet, and his quiet was heavier than any speech. Sadie called in from Calgary and said, flat out, "You understand that place better than any of us, Nora. If you don't take it, they'll have to sell." And Nora stood in the same kitchen where she used to help her dad cut keys and mix paint when she was 8 years old, and she looked at her father's hands, which had started to shake more than they used to, and she said, "I'll help. But I'm not moving back. Not permanently." The room went silent. "I can rebuild the whole thing," she told them. "A real website, online ordering, curbside and delivery across the valley, shipping further out, proper social media, proper accounts. I'll come down a few days a month to be here in person. But I can't give up Ottawa. I can't give up the life I made. I won't." Her mother asked, "Is this because of him?" Nora was quiet for a second. Then she said, "Partly, but not only." She looked at her father. "I'm staying because, for the first time, I have a life I actually chose instead of one I fell into. I love this family. I love your store. But I also love the person who's waiting for me to come home, and I'm not going to give him up to save a hardware store when I can save the hardware store without giving anybody up." Her father didn't speak for a long while. Then he just asked, "Is he good to you?" "Yes," Nora said. "Shroon, does he make you laugh?" She smiled, even with tears on her face. "Even when he's being an idiot, especially then." Roland let out a long breath, the kind a man lets out when he's setting something down. "Then don't you dare leave the one who makes you want to come home," he said. "I built that store so my girls could have choices, not so they'd have a cage with my name on it." That was when Nora started crying for real. She called me again that same night. The second I picked up, before I could even say hello, she said, "I'm coming back to Ottawa." I closed my eyes and felt something that had been clenched in my chest for 3 days finally let go. "What about the store?" "I'm going to save it from here," she said. "Website, online ordering, the whole system. I'm not abandoning my family. But I'm not abandoning us either. I'm done choosing between things I love. I'm going to be greedy and keep all of it." I laughed, a little unsteady. "Good, be greedy." "Are you still there?" she said, and I knew she was teasing me, throwing my own basement back at me, the word I'd said into a monitor that started all this. "Yeah," I said. "I'm still here. I'm always going to be still here. That's kind of the whole point of me." 3 days later, she came home and dragged her suitcase into the middle of the living room and stood there looking around at the place. "Okay," she said. "This time I'm not going to pretend I accidentally left my stuff here over 6 months. I'm just moving in. Officially. Out loud." I picked up her suitcase. "Then let me help you move in properly. For real this time." "For real," she said. We built something new after that, and it was better than either of us had pictured because it was actual instead of imagined. Nora kept her design work during the day and rebuilt her father's whole business at night from our kitchen table. Fabric swatches finally shoved aside, to make room for product photos and shipping labels. I helped where I could. I built her a little photo setup in the garage, shot the lumber and the tools and the paint cans, learned more than I ever wanted to know about e-commerce. Orders started coming in from Smith's Falls, from Carlton Place, from Kingston, from people 2 provinces over who'd never have driven to Perth in their lives. One night in the fall, we sat on the living room floor surrounded by half-built shelving I was installing, her laptop open on a crate, and the little dashboard showed the store had cleared its best month in 11 years. She had tears in her eyes, the good kind. "I think my dad's going to be okay," she said. I pulled her in against me. "What about you?" She rested her head on my shoulder. "I think I am too." Her laptop was still open. The camera was still on from a call she'd just finished with the kid she'd hired to run the counter in Perth. I could see the two of us reflected in the dark corner of the screen. A guy with sawdust still in his hair, and a woman who'd somehow ended up in the middle of his life, sitting on the floor of a place that belonged to both of them now. I nodded at it. "You going to remember to turn the camera off this time?" Nora laughed. "That real one, the one I'd spent 6 years not knowing I was living for." "No need," she said. "I don't have anything left to hide." I reached over and took her hand, and I thought about the $30 monitor that had carried her voice up out of a cold stone basement and changed everything, and how the worst-kept secret in 2 families had finally been said out loud, and how it turned out the thing I'd been so afraid of losing was the thing that had been waiting the whole time for me to be brave enough to keep it. "Then say it," I said. She turned and looked right at me, steady, no fear left in it anywhere. "I love you, Caleb Mercer," she said, "and I'm choosing to stay. Both of those, on purpose." "I love you too," I said, "and I'm never going to make you wait for anything again." There was no accidental confession this time. No secret spilling out of a device somebody forgot to switch off. Just 2 people who'd spent 6 years terrified of losing each other, finally deciding to build a home where nothing ever needed to be hidden again. And finding out, the way you only can once you stop being scared, that it had been home the whole time.